Good evening, everyone, and welcome again to another Torah study. This week we studied a portion of Mishpatim. Mishpatim means laws, rulings set forth by God. The rules, the commandments in this week's portion appear immediately after the discussion of the Ten Commandments. But there is something that's directly associated with the Ten Commandments that appear in this week's portion, and it appears more than once. Excuse me one moment. All right. We read about God is sending Moses to inquire whether the Jewish people are willing to enter into a covenant with God and receive the Torah. And many of us are familiar with the response. The Jewish people said, "We will do and we will hear." Though that statement appears in this week's Torah portion. If you open up, if you have the same Chumash, the same book that we study in the synagogue, on page 504, verse 3, Moshe brought the words of God before the people, and the people they said in unison and said, all the words that God has spoken, we will do. A page later, same chapter, 24. Now we read in verse 7. We read the following. He took the book of the covenant, which is a scroll of the text that appears until now, and till this period. He read it aloud so the people could hear, and they said, we will do and we will hear everything that God has said. We will do and we will hear sound inappropriate and sometimes may not make sense because you cannot do unless you hear first. We are dealing with God's commandments. They should have said, we will hear and we will do. Yet they said, we will do and we will hear in this week's portion. The Talmud shares with us that when Moshe returned back to God, as we read in this week, and he repeats their words, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear, God is very pleased and he's in dismay. He's actually very surprised and he's asking, who revealed this secret to my children? Who had revealed to them about the secret code, the code of we will do and we will hear. And the question that comes, what kind of a code are we talking about? How did the Jewish people discover that code and why the code is so important? And this will take most likely the entire lesson class today. I do not believe that you heard that because the following I studied when I was very young, and I feel this is very appropriate for today. I'm going to share with you two explanations. They are both different from each other, yet they are very, very powerful. The Talmud tells us that there was a rabbi who was approached by a Roman scholar. And the Roman scholar turned to the rabbi and says, Amapziza, you are hasty people who do not put too much thought into your behavior. Why? Because you said Naaseh before you said Nishma. You said we will do before you don't even know what's involved. It is a lifetime commitment, not just for my life, but my children, grandchildren, and future generations. And yet we don't find that the Jewish people inquired what involves. They just said, we will do, and then we will hear. The simple answer that I give, or that is given all the time, when what they said was, we will do, we will accept God's yoke, accept your commandments, and then we will hear the reasons. In other words, we're not going to do it because we agree. we will follow God's ruling even when it does not necessarily make sense or we don't fully comprehend and know the details. But I want to share with you and get a little bit deeper into the idea of we will do and we will hear. The following is one explanation. I have collected it from several sources. It's not mine, but I have studied it many years ago. I believe perhaps when I was in yeshiva. There are certain aspects in our life that there is no need to have a mentor or a teacher for. For example, a child would learn how to eat. A child learns how to walk. A child learns how to speak without having a mentor. Even if you leave someone with parents who, God forbid, care less about the child will be able to develop on its own the necessary traits and behavior for his protection, for his life. Yet, there are other areas of life that we need a mentor. We need someone to teach us. So, for example, to be kind to another person, to respect someone who is older than myself, there is no way that my children can say, if God forbid they did not behave, nobody told us. There's no such thing as nobody told us. We call it common sense, and it's more than common sense. It is ingrained in us that you must respect people just like you want to be respected. And if someone has more experience in life and had endured more days here on earth, he deserves respect and honor. So my parents never taught me, never needed to teach me how to get up on a bus when an older person comes in. This was obvious because it is something we are brought up with. One can ask, how is it possible that driving a car, for example, we need to learn and go through a test? Driving a car, you need a license. Raising children, you don't need a license. No one has to apply for a license to have a child. Even though raising of children in all aspects is more complicated than driving a car, first, I am impacting the life of another person forever. Number two, it affects the society in a far greater way than driving a car, because those children will be part of society. And number three, it involves every aspect of the child's life, where when it comes to driving, it is limited to the time when I use the car for leisure or for business. Raising a child involves every aspect of the child: how to speak, how to shower, how to talk, how to walk, where to go, what's right, what's wrong. Yet you don't see that we require a license. And the reason for it is there is a gift that God embedded in our universe, which says that whatever we absolutely necessarily need, we have it. We don't need someone else to provide. So when it comes to raising children, people ask me, where did you learn? And I say to them, I didn't, nobody taught me. I was serious. I wanted to do it right, and it worked. Of course, I am not going to discourage any potential parent or parent who raises children from seeking advice, because it is necessary. And the reason is, if you think about it deeply, you'll discover any advice that professionals or otherwise provide for parents in raising children, it is advice for the parents, how the parents conduct themselves, what the parents do or don't do, how to reprimand, not to get angry, and not to react in a haste. But it's not about the child. If the child is left for themselves, the child or the parent did in the natural way with patience and putting a priority, they don't need any advice and they don't need to seek any professional help. I am sharing this with you, myself, and the previous generation and previous generations. People did not need all the help at our disposal today. I am all for learning and discovering and seeking and getting help from professionals who have tools and other ways of raising children. But I'm here to tell you that most of those tools, if not all of them, is geared or focused on the parents more than the child. This is the secret of the receiving of the Torah. The Jewish people, when they heard that God offers them to have a covenant and follow a very strict lifestyle, they right away accepted it in such a way by telling God, we know we will be able to do it without anyone teaching us. Only afterwards, if we have doubts, if we have questions, if we're not sure, if we have differences of opinions, we will then hear. And this is the secret that the Jewish people discovered by making a commitment to God. And that's why God was so excited and says, who revealed such a secret to my children? In other words, when they say we will do, they took the Jewish tradition and the yoke of God's commandments to become part of their life, not something they practice when they go to synagogue, not something they follow when they go to celebrate a holiday, but it is part of our day-to-day life, the way we conduct ourselves, the way we speak, the way we raise children, the way we connect to God. And because they knew that this is who they are, their identity, they turn to God and they turn to Moshe and says, tell God, we will do. And then we'll hear if we need any extra help. And we see the same idea previously with the forefathers. The Torah tells us that God rewarded Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob for following God's commandments. Yet we don't find anywhere that God commanded the Jewish people to follow the Torah. You won't find where God tells them what to do other than very few places. Yet we see that they always knew what to do. Our sages explain that because they knew that this is a covenant of the person with God and they made it a priority, now suddenly they know and they will find a way to please God and to do it right. This is the first explanation to the secret that God says, who revealed that secret to my people? I would like to share the practical application, and that applies across the board, male, female, Jew, Gentile, it doesn't matter who you are. If it is something you absolutely necessary for you, life, you will be provided. God will find ways to give it to you. There are countless examples, and I don't want to pick an example because I don't think that it's an exception to the rule. If you look back at your life, you'll find there were very many, so to say, avenues, many highlights of life where things fell into place and provided us, God had provided us exactly with what we needed at the right time, at the right place. All we need is to make the true commitment and serious commitment, and then suddenly it happens. And this is the secret that the Jewish people discovered when they said, we will do. The second one is a little bit deeper, but I think it's worth sharing. We read in the Talmud that when Moses ascended to Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, the Talmud teaches us, and it appears in several places in the Talmud, that the angels who upon seeing God starting with Moshe, they turned around and says, what is this man born to a mother, to a female, to a flesh and blood human being doing here in heavens? And they wanted to burn him. And then they heard that he's studying with God the Torah for 40 days. And they turned to God and complained that they deserve the Torah because they will keep it without any deviation. They'll be able to keep the Torah, study the Torah, and follow the commandments to a maximum degree in a very perfect way. And they wanted to kick Moshe out of Mount Sinai. God turned to Moshe and says, "Hold my chariot." This is the words of the Talmud. It appears in Shabbat, Tractate Shabbat, and Psachim in few places. God turned to Moshe and says, "Hold my chariot and give them an answer." And Moshe turned to them and he says, in the Torah, we are told the Ten Commandments is thou shalt not steal. Do you ever steal? The Torah, the Ten Commandments teach, honor thy father and mother. Are you born from a father and mother? Do you have a father and mother to respect? And therefore he turned to the angels. He says, you have no right to the Torah. This is the story that appears in the Talmud. From now on is Kabbalah. Kabbalah comes and asks, what is exactly the dispute between Moshe and the angels? They both want the Torah, right? What's wrong with giving the Torah to both? If I want the Torah and you to study Torah and you want to study Torah, there is no way that something will be diminished just because I share the Torah. After all, Torah is wisdom. Wisdom, the more you expand it, the more people discover it, the greater it becomes. We have a better, deeper understanding when there are more minds invested into the study. So what's wrong with allowing the angels to study Torah and human beings? How come the angels refuse and they're about to consume with their fire Moses and send them down to the earth and ask God to leave the Torah in the heavens because they can fulfill the Torah better than human beings? In addition, this is one of many, many questions. The second question is, what does Moshe answers? He says, you do not steal. There is no theft up in heaven. There is no father and mother. You can't fulfill those commandments. Obviously, the angels knew it. What kind of a chidush of something new that he's teaching them they didn't know? This is obvious that their stealing does not apply to them, that they have no father and mother to honor and respect. So what is this they were demanding if Moshe is responding in this way? There are many ways to explain it, but I want to get to the point of Naaseh Nishma. We will do and here is one way. I believe it's a beautiful way to explain. And that will explain why God says to Moshe, who will reveal this secret to my children. There is no doubt that the angels, when they study Torah, they have it on a different plateau. They have the understanding of the Torah that is studied in the heavens, does not deal with physical objects. So that we have in Kabbalah many examples where there is dispute in the Talmud about two litigants coming to court and God wants the ruling to be in a certain way. In the heavens, the litigants are two angels fighting about a spiritual behaving. When we talk about honor thy father and mother in the Ten Commandments, for the angels, they study the same Torah and there is nothing wrong. And they study about father and mother as to mean something else. The father that creates a good deed, the father that creates a pleasure to God. There is a whole different outlook on every word and every letter in the Torah when it studies up in heaven, because they do not deal with the physical and material world that we live in. When God gave the Torah, which is his treasure, he gave it to us. He gave it to the angels alike, and both of us can enjoy it, everyone according to the level. The dispute was who has the ability, the final say, to rule what is God desire. When you have two opinions, is it kosher or not? Sometimes two opinions is too little. Sometimes we have four opinions, six opinions. Different generations disagree. And you want to know, who should you follow? What is God's will? The angels had a good claim that they deserve to have the final say, because they told God that they are perfect human beings. They don't get angry, hungry. Their mind is always perfect and constant and clear, and they are able to study Torah in such a depth, such a deeper level, that they can find the exact reason and the exact purpose of every word, and they can develop it and desire and decide or reveal God's desire. What does God want me to do in this case? Moshe, on the other hand, when it comes to heavens, he says that the Jewish people said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We believe that God's will can be revealed only through action, only when someone performs God's will in action. And that does not happen in the heavens because they have no physical father and mother and they have no physical objects to steal. And that's the secret that God turned to Moshe and says, who reveals it? Let me explain. The Jewish people, when they said Naaseh v'nishma, they, so to say, responded to the claim of the angels. And we'll see soon how it applies to us today. They turned to God and said, when we will get involved in following your commandment in action, we will be able to hear you desire. Because only when you practice in reality, in the physical world, you are able to get to the deepest level of God's desire. It cannot be revealed in any other way. The angels wanted to make to be the ones to rule what is God's desire when God is not clear. God turned to Moshe and says, give them an answer. And Moshe said, the Jewish people told me they will be involved in action. He turned to the angel and says, do you do action in the mitzvot, in the Torah? All you do is you study in the spiritual realm, but you don't get involved physically with a human body, and therefore you will never reach the depth of the Torah. You will never be able to tell this is what God wants. And this is what God meant when he added a word or omitted a word or changed the order of events. And God turned to Moshe and says, who revealed that secret to my children, that action will lead to hearing? Naaseh v'nishma, we will do and then we will hear, which means we will first do the commandments, and that will lead us to hear God's words. We will know exactly what God meant when he repeats the same story again. We will know exactly what God means when he spells words or he has extra words, and that will be revealed only through action. And the angels had no choice but to accept that. So do they study Torah? Of course. The Talmud tells us there was a dispute in the heavenly court between God and the angels about a discoloration of tzarat, of a leprosy that changed to one way, but the hair changed another way, and they were disputing. God says it is pure. The heavenly court that says it's not pure, and they decided that here on earth they must make the ruling. So they had to bring back a rabbi who professed to be the expert on discoloration. His name is Rabbi Bar Chama, and Rabbi Bar Nachmani. It's a famous story. They tried to trick him to kill, he should die. The angel of death was sent, tried to trick him, and he refused because he was studying Torah. The angel of death had no power over someone who studied Torah. Until the angel of death made sound as if someone is trying to break to his house. He rushed to the door and he missed a step and he fell and died. When he died, he shouted, Taho, Taho, pure, pure, meaning he ruled in God's favor that the ruling is pure. The Talmud shares with us the reason we read about this story is because when the heavenly court ever dispute about what God himself wants, we have to come down here on earth and inquire among those who follow God's commandments, and they are the only one who can get to the deepest level of God's mind, so to say, and understand what God had in mind when he gave us the Torah. The Talmud shares with us the story about Rabbi Eliezer when he says the ocean should testify I'm right, and the walls caved in, and then a tree was moving, and then a heavenly voice came to the rabbi, say, what do you want from this man? The ruling is always with him. And the rabbis, each time he performed a miracle, the rabbis proclaimed that the Torah is not in heavens, the Torah is here on earth, and therefore we do not follow that. And the ruling was against Rabbi Eliezer regarding the oven, tanur, the stove of Achnai, which we discover on some several JLIs. I want to go back to this story here. That was the secret that the Jewish people discovered when they said Naaseh V'nishma. We will do, and that will give us a much deeper understanding what God wants us. We will be able to hear to a much greater level of God's desire. Why is it so important today? There are many people who takes the Torah as a very great philosophical wisdom, and they study the Torah and they enjoy delving into the Torah. The problem is when someone is not committed into the action to following God's wisdom, what happens is it can lead them to the worst spots. They can end up going against God and utilizing the Torah to bring them farther away from God. But when someone as simple as a human being makes a commitment to follow in action, God helps him that he's able to discover the Torah in its deepest level. And that's the secret in this week's portion when the Jewish people said to God, to Moshe, and Moshe delivered to God, Naaseh v'nishma, we will do and then we will hear. We were not in a haste. We did not skip any step. This was the secret. So again, we have two explanations why the Jewish people turned to God and said Naaseh v'nishma when he gave them the Torah. The first one is that they learn the secret that if it is absolutely necessary for your survival, for your life, you will acquire that trait on your own. You don't need any teachers, and therefore they will know what to do because they have committed themselves to, so to say, marrying God and accepting the Torah. The second explanation is only someone who is committed into action and is following in action is the one who is able to get deeper into the mindset of the commander, of the one who gave us the rules, of the one who desired for us to follow, because through action, seemingly it's an external behavior, yet it reveals the deepest level of desire by the giver. And with that, I would like to conclude the lesson for today. This is just for one point that appears in this week's portion. And I should conclude and say that this idea of Naaseh v'nishma has many other layers, but these two I felt that they were very, very appropriate. And I think I've never shared that before. So I want to wish everyone Shabbat Shalom, and let us all be able to share good news. Tonight is Rosh Chodesh Adar. Tomorrow and Shabbat is Rosh Chodesh. We hope you can make it tomorrow morning and Shabbat. This Shabbat is very unusual, where we read from 3 Torahs. We read the Torah portion of Mishpatim, we read the Shabbat Shkalim, the commandment to give tzedakah, and we read Shabbat Rosh Chodesh. On Rosh Chodesh we have an extra Torah reading. So we'll be using 3 separate Torahs, which is very unusual, doesn't happen that often. And Adar is a very happy, lucky month for all of us. So may we always enjoy every day of this month and bring only good news. So, Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Amen. Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
Yasher Koach. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.